The use of solitary confinement as punishment began in the early 19th century as prisoners were kept secluded to reflect on the crimes they committed. This type of ideology was present in the Pennsylvania prison system, but was then revoked due to the adverse psychological and physical effects it had on prisoners. However, the consequences of solitary confinement were clearly displayed as having a significantly negative impact on a prisoner's rehabilitation and readjustment to society. Even after learning about the debilitating psychological effects of solitary confinement, prisons still continue to enable the punishment today. In supermaximum security prisons, more commonly known as supermax facilities, solitary confinement is used to control disobedient prisoners. Cells are typically 8 feet by 10 feet and are made of cement with a hole in the door to slide meals through. There are usually no windows available, limiting exposure to natural light. Prisoners are confined in this manner for 22 to 23 hours a day. Solitary confinement is defined as the isolation of a prisoner in a separate cell as a punishment. We conducted a wide net survey and interviewed college students to find out their thoughts and feelings on if solitary confinement is an ethical punishment in the prison industrial complex.
I think solitary confinement is like when you put someone in a really small space, such as a cell or something, and then they couldn't be set free, so they have to stay in the cell for a really long time.
Solitary confinement is when a prisoner is relocated to his own cell, and like an 8 by 6 foot cell, and he is deprived contact from other prisoners for up to 23 hours a day.
We conducted a survey with over 100 responses asking if people support solitary confinement. Only 10.6% of people said that they support it, where the rest were equally against it or neutral. We asked interviewees if they support solitary confinement and why.
So far, I'm neutral about it. I do see the point in certain cases where if you're trying to control more of like riots and everything, or you just have like prisoners that are acting in a way where you can't really control them.
I don't really support like solitary confinement because I think the purpose of us putting criminals into the jail is like making them become a better person when they get out to the society. So I don't think putting them to a solitary cell is a good way because it'll cause a huge problem such as the mental health problem. Because when you set people in such a small place for such a long time, they would be like really crazy and frustrated in the cell. So yeah, I don't support that.
I don't support solitary confinement because I believe that the punishment for someone being sentenced to jail that's already the punishment.
I do, because I think that if a prisoner were to present some sort of danger to others, I think it would be best if they were taken away and isolated.
I don't support solitary confinement. I think it's inhumane, and I think I get the point of punishing a prisoner or protecting the other prisoners from someone who's dangerous, but I don't believe that's the correct method to do it.
In our survey, we asked, on a scale from 1 to 5, how prevalent do you think mental illnesses are inside solitary confinement? Over 90% of the responses we received said that mental illnesses are either somewhat prevalent or extremely prevalent. The majority of our surveyors also indicated that depression, anxiety, paranoia, hallucinations, irrational anger, and post-traumatic stress disorder were among the mental illnesses that prisoners experience in solitary confinement.
I think they're very prevalent just because I know just human beings are they're social creatures, so then humans, we drive off being able to socialize and interact with other people.
It's very, very prevalent because any individual being isolated for that long and having no activity either to stimulate their brain and not having anything to do and no human interaction and just literally sitting in a room that deteriorates someone's mental health, and especially since usually the prisoners are already having a lot of mental issues or physical issues. I think that would make it a lot worse.
I think they're extremely prevalent. I think the rate is very high because if you're cooped up in a room all alone by yourself for hours, days, weeks, months, years, however long it may be, and you don't have any interaction with others except through a little slot in your door.
Oh, definitely not. when it comes to rehabilitation, like people need to be able to, I guess, learn from their mistake and then learn in an environment that's a lot healthier than just being placed all alone with their own thoughts.
Definitely not. I don't think that's a good way to educate the prisoners or the criminals, because when you want to educate someone, you don't have to set them into such a devastated or desperate place or space. So yeah, I don't support that, and I don't think that's a good way to educate people.
I think that it's good only if it's short term. I think long term can have a lot of detrimental effects, like the ones that were listed. For long term, I think they could look into some better options out there if they wanted to reinforce good behavior.
I was in prison for 3 years, and in those 3 years I spent 65 days in solitary confinement because I was involved in an argument with members of a rival gang, and staff determined that I was a risk to the facility. Solitary confinement is meant to keep an inmate from having contact with other inmates on a compound. Conditions in solitary confinement are rough, starting with the fact that the lights in the cell are on 24 hours a day, and that the cold air blasts through the vents 24 hours a day as well, so you can imagine how hard it is to get quality sleep. To help pass my time, I'd read books. I'd probably read about 5 books a week on average. When I got tired of reading, I'd work out, and when I got tired of that, I'd stand at the cell door and look out the small window toward the other cells. When you're in solitary confinement, you're allowed 1 hour of phone time in a 10 by 15 feet room, where there is also a workout bar. Since I worked out in my cell, I would use the phone for a whole hour, and that'd be the best hour of my day because it'd take me away from the place that I was in. Showers are only offered 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And those days that I didn't get a shower, I'd have to bird bath using a sink in my cell. Whenever an inmate has to leave his cell for whatever reason, he must be cuffed and escorted by 2 officers. Solitary confinement is rough. Luckily, my mind was strong enough to cope with it, but I've met others who weren't lucky and developed PTSD and other disorders.
Solitary confinement is detrimental to the social, physical, and mental well-being of inmates. They are isolated in a small cell without any sort of human contact. Inmates are only allowed outside of their cell for about an hour each day to exercise in a concrete open-air cell that is about 16 feet by 20 feet in size. The sensory and social deprivation in solitary confinement leads to many mental illnesses in inmates, such as depression, paranoia, anxiety, irrational anger, and hallucinations. It has been found that solitary confinement is ineffective and does more harm than good. Albert Woodfox is an example of someone who has experienced the detrimental effects of solitary confinement. He was in solitary confinement for 43 years, and once released, he had to relearn how to walk downstairs.
There are plenty of alternatives to solitary confinement that are more effective than placing a prisoner inside of a small isolated cell. In Colorado and Oregon, programs have been implemented that help prisoners who are inside solitary confinement cells be released back into the general population with good behavior. This is important as it helps the prisoner understand that their behavior is not acceptable. Another project organized by the Vera Institute of Justice is the Safe Alternatives to Segregation. This project has plenty of programs in multiple states such as Oregon, Colorado, Nebraska, Virginia, etc., being implemented as alternatives for solitary confinement. A program they have in Oregon is called the Blue Room, where they show prisoners films with nature in a quiet room which is painted with blue colors, or an aquarium mural, so they have a place to get away and calm down before acting out in anger. It helps everyone, prisoners and guards, calm down and have a better attitude and relationship with one another. If solitary confinement were to continue to be used, it is extremely critical that the guards who are in charge of placing prisoners in solitary confinement be trained on mental health and illnesses and have proper training on skills to help the inmate rather than to punish. Instead of punishing the inmate, it is more beneficial to get them help with a psychiatrist or psychologist if available.